Welcome everyone to the Service Learning Reflection Journal for Kids webinar. Today we are going to talk about the Service Learning Reflection Journal with Dr. Margaret Sass, and she's going to walk us through and answer some questions and share the journal with us and how you can use it with your students. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to type them into the chat box and we will answer them throughout or at the end. So we'll just jump right in and get started. I want to introduce myself and the other people on the webinar so you kind of know who we are and know who you're talking to. Again, my name is Elizabeth Koenig. I'm with NYLC as a Professional Development and Training Manager. Margaret is with us from Purdue University, where she works with service learning and curriculum instruction. And then Marcus Penny is also with us today from NYLC. And he will be answering any sort of technical questions that you might have, or if you're having issues hearing or using this platform, if you want to type those directly to him in the chat box, he can help you out. So I want to jump right in today. We're going to first just talk a little bit about reflection in general and the reflection in the service learning process before we jump into talking about the journal. So I wanted to touch on the IPARD framework. This is the framework that NYLC uses for the student's service learning experience. So IPARD, I don't know if anyone's familiar with it. It is investigate, plan, act, reflect, and demonstrate, and that's kind of the service learning cycle that students go through. And as you can see, this is a very, probably a familiar framework to you guys, or it could be an inquiry model that you use, or a project-based learning model. This is a very familiar model to a lot of people. And today we're talking specifically about the reflection component. So when we talk about reflection, it does kind of in the visual sit in the post-service part, but it's really something that happens throughout the service learning process, as you can see with kind of the dashed line in the middle, that it happens in pre-service, service, and post-service, and it's kind of a continual process. So we'll kind of talk a little bit more about that and show how the Service Learning Journal really supports that. So a definition of reflection, so we're kind of all on the same page. This is how NYLC defines reflection, and quality reflection at that. So service learning incorporates multiple challenging reflection activities that are ongoing and that prompt deep thinking and analysis about oneself and one's relationship to society. So that's kind of the general definition. And if you're looking for more information about reflection, NYLC has a free resource that's really great. It's kind of a multimedia resource called The Lift, and the address is at the bottom of the screen. And this has videos of students participating in service learning. It has templates for you in your service learning process. It has research and resources. So this is a great tool if you're looking for more information about reflection specifically or service learning as a whole. So I just want to talk about, I know I mentioned quality service learning and what quality service learning reflection looks like. So here are kind of a couple things about what it means to have quality service learning reflection. So first, it really includes multiple intelligences. It allows students to use verbal, written, artistic, and nonverbal activities to demonstrate understanding and changes in participants' knowledge, skills, or attitudes. Service learning reflection, like we talked about a little bit ago, is constant. It occurs before, during, and after the service experiences. Service learning also prompts deep thinking about complex community problems and alternative solutions. And then service learning also encourages participants to examine their preconceptions and assumptions in order to explore and understand their roles and responsibilities as citizens and that connection to public policy and civic life. So that's kind of just a quick overview of reflection. Again, if you're looking for more information about kind of this, you can look at The Lift and at NYLC's resources. But with that, we're going to show you another great resource to guide your students through reflection, which is the Service Learning Reflection Journal for Kids. So Margaret has developed many guidebooks on service learning, but today she's here to share with us her Service Learning Reflection Journal for kids. So I'm going to pass it over to Margaret, and she's going to introduce herself and the journal, and then we're going to talk about how it works and how to use it. Margaret?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. So my Service Learning Reflection Journal is the third one that I developed. I began in the process by creating some reflection journals for higher education. And I first focused on higher education for the fact that I am the Assistant Director of Service Learning at Purdue University. So we've been mainly focusing on undergraduates and even graduate students. And I decided that when I was starting to work more with students, that a lot of them that were coming to me did not have any exposure to community service or service learning before they even came to Purdue. So I started thinking about how to reach out to K through 12 about service learning, community service, and do it with some thought behind it rather than just sending out and doing service without knowing the actual value of it. So that's a general introduction of where I'm coming from and how I began to write these journals for kids, for higher ed, mainly K through 16.
Awesome. Thanks, Margaret. So can you talk a little bit about some of the research or different experiences that you drew upon in the development of this journal?
Absolutely. So before I actually went and got my doctorate of education, I was working as a high school teacher, and then I started working in community colleges, and that's when I started really being exposed to service learning and community service. I hadn't really done anything with that other than the fact that I had been a student that did a lot of community service when I was in high school. And when I started going to Boise State University for my doctorate in education, I started realizing that the service learning had a very strong theoretical background that I wasn't aware of. And that's where I discovered a little bit more about different philosophers such as Dewey and Kolb and Vygotsky are the three main theorists that I've created my service learning journals based upon. So Dewey was back in the 1900s, and he was considered a rebel to some certain respect in the educational world for the fact that he wasn't your typical educator where you had someone standing in the front and then had rows and rows of students just write down information, and we call it a banking system where you dump the information into their head and they don't really use it for any purposes. So he started this whole idea that you should actually work with your environment and that students learn more. Based on that, Kolb came in the 1980s called experiential learning, where you interact with your environment and you actually do things that you reflect upon it, because that was a main source of value behind learning something, that you actually stopped and thought about the process of what you were doing. And a lot of service learning or community service, you are doing a lot of activity with your environment, with different societies, and then you actually need to stop and ponder and think about that process in an intellectual way rather than just doing it. And then lastly, it was Vygotsky that I added to my theoretical framework because he believed that you learn from your peers. And there was no better place to learn from those that you're interacting with, and also your own students or peers are beside you. So if you're working in an environment with the homeless, but there's a group of students with you, you can learn from their own reflections and their own thoughts and gain from that. So based mainly on those three type of theorists is where I kind of came up with the idea to have a reflection journal. And I did it in such a way that there was prompted questions, because I learned from experience that if you just ask general questions, you may not get what you're looking for. So I started researching a lot of different prompted questions that other researchers have been using, and I also started reading several community service books that were children level, so I can manipulate what I have written for higher ed into some type of dialogue that students of a younger age would be able to understand.
Awesome. So now that you kind of talked a little bit about the background, can you kind of walk us through the different components of the journal and why these components are important as part of the reflection process?
Yes, so behind the scenes of the reflection process, I actually wanted to create something within these journals and this one as well, something that would cause a person that's doing service learning to maybe think about taking advantage of a research opportunity or really trying to understand a more quantitative gain that the students might be establishing. Because reflection is really based a lot on their responses and what they say, but I really wanted some type of Likert scale that educators could use. So there is an actual Likert scale, something that's similar to what you see on your front page, 1 to 10, except it's 40 questions, and it's called the Public Affairs scale that was in higher education. So what I did, I took the main concepts behind that and changed the wording to see if students could understand that were pretty much, I would roughly state, between the grade levels of 3rd and 5th grade, depending on the classroom, of course. Now, the scale is the very beginning of the reflection journal, but it's also at the very end. It's identical. So my hope is that someone that's using it could see what a student had circled and then compare it to the end of the service learning project to see if anything had actually changed. So I understand that reflection and the writing can show growth and change and even sometimes even backwards because they realize that maybe they didn't know as much as they thought they did. But I thought this would be more of the quantitative aspect of it. So that would be the first part of it and the very last part of it. So that's what we're looking at, right, this scale. Do you want me to move on, Elizabeth, to the next?
Yeah, unless, again, I just want to remind people that if you have questions, feel free to send them in throughout. Otherwise, we'll kind of keep moving through the journal, and we can also take your questions at the end if you have them then, too. But are you ready to move on to the next slide?
Mm-hmm. So there is some information in between this page of the community service log that kind of asks the student to do a general reflection before they even started the process. As Elizabeth mentioned, I want students to reflect previous or prior to their actual community service project or service learning project. This right here is a community service log because I want there to be some type of accountability and the hours that they spent. Now, in higher ed, sometimes this is done if an instructor wants him to volunteer so many hours per semester. Here, this is really for the benefit of the student understanding where they're volunteering, how much time they're actually spending there, and then I put somewhat of a reward system in it. So at the very end of the book, you can get some type of community service certificate. And I have established bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. These hours are based, actually, of me talking to some different elementary school teachers as well as high school teachers about what would be considered reasonable hours. So that's where the hours actually come from. I want to make it significantly low at 10 because I wanted them to be honored for actually doing so many hours. But then 40 hours should be also highly respected because it's a lot of time that they're taking out to do. Not all service learning or community service projects can actually occur during class time, especially with all the testing that's occurring these days, but this would be an opportunity for them to actually carry something around with them if they're doing service or community service, maybe on the weekends after school, something that might be associated with a church or an organization or anything that would help them understand the process of what community service is all about. So that's what the community service log is. So the Service Learning Project Plan is more of a structure or organizational type of structure for students to get their thoughts together and what they're doing. I always believe that we should have a plan in place before we go and do it, because that's where we may miss an opportunity to really understand how we're volunteering, why we're volunteering, what is the purpose behind it. So this is an opportunity for students to stop and think about what community service really is, if they've only heard the terminology. This might be also another opportunity for teachers to discuss what community service is all about. Like I said, there are some books out there that discuss community service, but there's not a lot. Where are they going? That is also very significant. There's a huge difference between something like working in a low-profit elderly daycare center versus a homeless shelter. There's a different population, there's a different purpose of the organization, and obviously different activities that are appropriate for children of different ages. They also should know why the organization in itself exists, and that could be an opportunity for kids to do some type of research. One of the schools I work with out here in Indiana, K through 12 all have iPads. Every single student has iPads. So they have an opportunity to go research the organization actually on their own time as well as in the classroom based on what the teacher actually wants. So that gives them a chance to really think about research and do research and maybe do their own analysis. And then the purpose of the project, so even though the nonprofit may be doing their own specific goals or mission statement, the students come in or the teacher has something that's organized about the project itself. So how does this one particular project help this organization? How is there a connection between the two? How does it really help this nonprofit organization? We do know that sometimes volunteers are sent out to different places that they actually cause maybe more stress on the organization than actually help them. So I think that needs to be discussed and explained, that sometimes certain types of service are more beneficial than others. And then to really think about how it's going to make some type of impact on the organization itself, on the people or animals or whatever it may be serving. And that's another opportunity to look at your own community and see what the needs are. Again, sometimes we go out there and we volunteer or we create nonprofits that there is not a need for it in the community. This is an opportunity or a chance for a child to really look into it and say, okay, what is my community lacking? Let's say maybe it's education on dental hygiene or something. So they're going to focus on that because that's the need of the community. Maybe it's not poverty or something else. Or it may be something completely different that they're not aware of. So great opportunity to kind of get that interaction with your community and really understand it, as well as the people. Because sometimes we live in a closed environment and we're not really exposed to what's going on outside of us. But I think that is just as important about what's going outside of the classroom as well as what's going on inside the classroom. So that's the project plan.
Awesome. So Margaret, do you have a thought of whether this journal should be used if a student is doing kind of an individual service learning project, or could this journal be used also if the whole class is doing a project together? Is there kind of a preference or an idea, or could it be used in either way?
It really could be used for either way, but I guess I would lean towards an individual approach, meaning you can do it as a class, but the book itself will be used for that one person or that one child. So I don't know if I mentioned this, but the Service Learning Journal is free to everybody to download it. And so a student would actually download it, or the teacher would download it, make photocopies, and then they would be able to carry it around with them. I wanted it to be some more mobile, for the fact that if they're out there and they're doing the service, that they can write and think about it at that time instead of waiting a week or two. I have in here mainly daily, that it can be used as daily or weekly. And I think anybody can go in and manipulate it and change it based on their needs. So if it doesn't fit into the curriculum, or if it doesn't fit into a particular classroom, but let's say a religious organization or a church is interested about incorporating community service as part of their own religious curriculum, then it can be changed according to what their needs are. So it's just a free resource for people to really stop and think about, okay, what is community service, what are we doing, and how are we helping? I think that would be the overall goal, and that's why I made it free. I think my next stop would be make it digital. I made the other two service learning journals for higher education a digital process so they can open it up on their phone. But we are talking about third graders to fifth graders, so I don't know if that's necessarily a need yet, other than the fact that maybe the cost of printing paper is too much at this time.
Awesome.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's really helpful. And then the question just came through as well is, you talked about, using it and manipulating it for your own needs. This question is about whether she would be able to translate it into Spanish or translate it into a different language as well.
That's an excellent thing to have mentioned, because I actually have a graduate assistant that speaks Spanish that is translating it at this time. So she's starting with the higher education ones, and then we're moving our way to Spanish, and we are interested in even making it into Chinese, except that is probably, it's not the first one that we're going to translate it into, because in China they do service learning, but it's not probably as exposed as it is here, if that makes sense. But anyone can translate it if they wanted to, and that could be a project on their own.
Okay, well, we'll move on to kind of looking at what that daily journal looks like that you referred to before.
Okay, so even though it says daily journal, it's in such a way that it could be actually a weekly journal based on the project. I focus mainly on daily journals for kids because the project might not be so long-term as my students would have for the semester, and I make them reflect on a weekly basis instead of daily. The daily also is for spring break activities where you see the student go away for a week and do community service. I don't know how common that would be in elementary school, but that was the process behind the daily aspect. So this is a little different for the fact that I have writing as well as drawing. I think sometimes students have a hard time articulating. So if they can't really answer the questions that are being prompted to them, then they may be able to explain or expose what they're thinking via drawing something, which may allow a younger group of students to use it under third grade that could just draw about their experiences rather than just write about it. But the writing part actually helps students learn how to write better and how to think about certain things. So I wanted to touch base on both of those aspects. You'll also see on the page where they can draw a picture of what they did, another scale. And the reason why I have a scale here, which they would do every single day, is another reason for the quantitative aspect. I wanted to see, or have a teacher have the opportunity to see that could there be growth between the weeks, could their attitude shift during a certain time, like maybe after 10 hours or 30 or something really important happened that day. So is that when the transition occurred? So I kind of left it up to the educator on how they would want to use that, if they want to use it at all. So that's the picture side. The other side where there's writing, if you look down, there's also feedback from a teacher. I do know that when I am reading students' reflections, they want me to write and comment on their reflections. They actually, and if I don't, they'll ask me about it. So I purposely set aside a space where a teacher could write about certain things, and then if she wanted to use it as an assignment, then she could actually give a grade. And that's up to the person. When I did my reflection, or when I'm still doing my reflections in school, I would do just a pass or a check mark for them actually doing it. I never graded them on it for the aspect that I think their opinions and their reflections are something of value, and I didn't want to put a grade on it. However, if someone wanted to use this as a writing tool or to to actually meet something that was required in the writing aspect of that grade, then perhaps they could use it towards that. So that's why there's a grade there. So the grade is not, maybe I didn't explain it too much, but the grade is not based on what level of grade they're in. It's just based on what the teacher has decided to give them as a grade.
I really
so,
the kind of the scale that you have, and it allows kind of that check-in, or that, you know, some teachers use exit slips or whatever, just to kind of track throughout to make sure the students are on track and moving forward, and they can kind of more quickly identify where the holes are. So I think that's a really great part of this daily journal.
Yeah, and I'm hoping it's fun too. And when I say, by the way, when I say draw, it doesn't necessarily have to be with crowns or markers. I'm also thinking the aspect of collages. I know that when I was in elementary school, I used to cut out things out of magazines and also out of books, or even print off things off of the computer, and I would create a story based on what I pulled from those magazines and those newspapers. So I left that artistic part up to whoever is using it. So the final service learning project assignment is kind of the whole cycle, especially based on Kolb and what Elizabeth said in the beginning of this, is that you have to reflect prior to the activity so they know what they're going into and understand the concept behind it. Then they do their reflections daily or weekly, and at the very end they come back and they reevaluate. So in this aspect came a lot from alternative break courses, because sometimes when they come back, like from a large service learning project, they just come back and then that's it, the end. And I think there's so much that can be used for educational purposes. And I think that also it's a really great way to incorporate an assignment or an essay into the curriculum. So the purpose of the project is to really think about what they did and how they understood how whatever project that they did related to the class itself. So if they're helping something with the homeless and involves food, maybe the topic is food sustainability. Maybe they planted trees for an organization and it refers to the environment and what they're learning in the class about photosynthesis or something. And then you go into the content of the paper, what they did help. That's more of the logistics to kind of give them an idea of what they actually did and think about it. Usually that triggers more thought. So sometimes when my students are doing projects or they're writing about it, I ask them to just give me the story behind what they did and then kind of reflect upon it. And then the questions and thoughts to think about, these are just a variety of things about what the educator may want to focus on, maybe not so much, and have the opportunity to really think about what they were doing. It would be a good point also to have a discussion in the class, or have a debriefing, is I guess what I would call it, where they would just sit in a room or a group or in smaller groups and really share about what they learned. Because the conversation, the learning opportunities between the peers can be very rich and very interesting. And I do know that when I see it, it can be actually really inspiring and encourages me and others to want to continue the process because of those aha moments. So that would be the final service.
Yeah, I think this is a great part of the service learning process. It's kind of like asking kind of like, now what? Or what are you going to, you know, now that you learned, now that you experienced, what are you going to keep doing? How are you going to, you know, continue and start that service learning process over to fix the next thing that you want to fix in the community or address the next issue? So I think these are really good questions to make those students think deeper about what they experienced.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's great that kids go and do community service projects and service learning projects. It is, but I guess I'm trying to plant a seed so they'll continue. I think that's the most important part. I mean, the goal is that if they're doing this when they're kids, then when they get to high school, maybe they'll choose something like this for a capstone project, and then once they get into college, they'll actually seek out organizations or classes that offer opportunities like this, and then of course, once they graduate, then they're going to become aspiring active citizens that are helping their community. I kind of look at the full picture, and that's why I started so young. And if I could, I would even start at kindergarten if I could really think about the process behind it, because I think we have an opportunity to really show them the value of being part of where they live and how they have the power to change the world, even if it's little smaller projects until they become adults.
Yeah. So the next part is the coming back to that quiz that they took at the beginning.
Absolutely, it's a full circle, yes. So if the teacher wants them to use it, that's great. If not, that's fine as well. It's really for their own tools to see if there's been a change. I have used this in higher education to see if there's been growth in my own students. It's a little different, at least the scale's a little different than the higher education one, because the other one has been tested and validated and et cetera. But it can be broken down to see if they have learned more leadership skills. Are they more engaged with the community? And sometimes, like I mentioned in the beginning, that it goes backwards, meaning it drops down in the scale, and I don't necessarily think that is bad. So, for instance, I know I can make a difference in my community, or I will volunteer in the future. Those can be something that probably will go up. But if they if they think they've been doing a really good job, or they have been volunteering, and at the end of this whole activity they realize that they don't, well, then that would obviously open their eyes to going, wow, you know what, I thought I was really helping or doing services, but now that I really know what that means. So that's what I mean by slightly going backwards. So the last pages of this book are actually the community service awards that the student can either cut out or photocopy. So if someone were to download this book, you would probably photocopy the back because it's a regular paper size, and then either frame it or give it to them or something like that. I did this because I know that a lot of kids like rewards of some sort. If it's not a sticker, then it's something else that shows what they did. I know that's probably why I read so many books at a young age. I wanted to see all the stars behind my name. That's probably one thing that caused me to read so much. But if you were to actually purchase the book, because if you purchase the hard copy, it's at cost. You want something like that. It's probably half the size because I wanted it to be a little more mobile if they actually go out and do experiential learning in their environment. So that would probably be something that they would keep on their own and use. But like I said, to download, it's just a photocopy, and to use it to recognize that whatever they did in the community should be valued. So if they didn't have the best reflections in the universe, or you didn't see a lot of growth or something, at least it can show that they actually did something in their own community, and they should be proud of themselves. So in the beginning, I think it was gold, silver, bronze, and platinum are the different levels. And if this is not as fancy as some people might want, then of course the teacher can make their own, change the hours, make a different recognition, like the best project or the best reflections or the best essay or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. That reward or that kind of public recognition of the work that they did and that it was important is really helpful.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's kind of the, as Margaret said, there's many more pages in the journal, and you guys can download it for free, and we'll give you that link at the end. But I kind of wanted to open it up for questions, and feel free to submit your questions in the box while we're talking, and we'll kind of link to some of those other resources at the end. But I just kind of wanted to, while you guys are thinking about your questions, I kind of wanted to kind of think back to when we talked about quality service learning reflection and what that means. So, and I really think that this reflection journal meets all of those standards for quality service learning and those indicators. So it uses multiple intelligences. It allows students to kind of creatively express what they're thinking and what they experienced through those, whether they're going to write or draw or create a collage or any of those things. It's constant. It's throughout the service learning process. There's a beginning and an end, and in the middle there's regular check-ins and reflections about what they're experiencing. It really does promote deep thinking with some of those probing questions, so it really gets beyond that surface level reflection of like, it was fun, or I really liked playing with the dogs. You know, it really pushes them beyond that. And then it really examines those preconceptions and assumptions and helps them make connections. And I think those guiding questions are really important for that, to help them make those connections for themselves and learn about their community and learn about what they want to contribute again. So just kind of wanted to go over that, and I have a question that I'll introduce. So, and this might also lead into kind of talking about the work that you've done with older students. So what are the most important changes you would introduce for older students?
So my ServiceLearning Reflection journal, that is also on the website and is also free for download. It is, I guess on that picture, it's actually the first one. The main difference between the two is first the scale. The scale, the pre and post, is 40 questions. It's a validated scale, so you could actually use it and write articles on it. And you don't need anyone's permission to use it. It's just open access to be used. And that is broken down to 3 different categories. So it's slightly different than the one that's in my children's book, because that one's obviously easier. The assignments, there's some more pre-assignments and there's some more post-assignments that make them really think about being strategic about it, organizing it better, and really using it as assignments. The weekly and the daily journals are similar. They're still prompting questions that I was able to pull from a lot of different places to see what would encourage them to reflect about certain things. And there's also a small scale in there too, to do an analysis if you want to about the games. So that would be the main difference. It's a smaller size. I purposely made it that way for someone to stick it in their backpack or carry it with them, because I want them to think about what they're doing at the time. So the pre and the post are obviously something that they reflect upon, but the daily is something I kind of want them to pick up at that moment. So that would be the big difference. And that one is now digital as well. It's on a program called Jetpack, so they can actually download the app for Jetpack and then open it, and then they can type in reflection notes and then just save it and email it to them later, and then come back to the post type of assignment, if that makes sense.
So are there any other questions that people have? You can feel free to type them in the chat box. Margaret, do you want to talk a little bit about, you gave a good overview of the one for older students, but do you want to touch on any of the other resources that you have available as well? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm looking at something from Kathy's Google. She says, as a coach, I can't interfere or give them advice or help. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, this can be, by the way, I just want to mention that to Kathy, that this can be completely private. I have the opportunity, I put in there where people can grade it and write about it, and the teacher can look at it, but that's not necessarily true. I'm sorry? Okay. So the ServiceLearning Reflection journals can be private, and then the middle one that you see is going to be very generic, so it's a little more just open-ended type of questions. So that can kind of help them think about it themselves, but maybe in Kathy's case, she can't necessarily give them that. You know,
okay.
Yeah, she can't interfere. So yeah.
Yeah, there's one I just recently created, and I made it purposely for freshmen of the first year of school. There is no one grading it. It's just something that they can download themselves and use because it's also free. And I made it like a diary. So it's 300 it's the expansion of a full semester or full 2 semesters of school for them to not only think about what they're doing, what they're learning about in school, but also on a personal level. So instead of having like the picture that you would see in the children's reflection, one side is about, okay, so what did you do today? Did you have fun? You know, what did you notice? And the other side is, so what did you learn in school today? How does that help you in your career? How does that help you in your future? And that is to the point where it's not being graded. It's just an overall diary for them to kind of keep with them forever. That might work a little bit better, I would think.
Great. Well, if there's any other questions, feel free to type those in. Margaret kind of shared the resources that are available through her, and again, those, like she said, this journal that we talked about today is free to download. And then also I just want to mention quickly the Generator School Network. So that's NYLC's online professional development community. And this webinar, the recording of this webinar, along with links to the resources that Margaret has shared with us today will be there, so you can look for it there and then ask any questions or connect with others who are on the webinar and interested in this service learning journal and this reflection for young students. So that's what we've got today. Thank you so much, Margaret, for sharing these resources that you developed. Hopefully everyone is able to use them with their students to guide deeper and more meaningful reflection. So thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.